In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 129 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is doing your best. Our quote of the day comes to us from John Wooden. Make each day your masterpiece. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. As we continue with our Pay It Forward theme, it is both a privilege and a complete honor to bring you today's episode. I've been a fan, a reader, and a big believer in the work of Don Yaeger for many years. When it comes to adding value and positively making a difference, that is exactly what Don does. I hope you truly listen to his words and hear the importance of what it means to honestly and openly pay it forward for others. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Don, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Chris, thank you so much. Appreciate it, buddy.
So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
I have been sitting here for the last 5 hours just wishing this could have started 5 hours ago. That's how ready I am.
Awesome. So in life, we all encounter obstacles, and I was wondering, with your very successful sports background, if you either have a favorite no-quit story in the sports background or a personal time in your life when you faced adversity and you could have given up or given in, but you didn't and you kept on going.
As you and I were chatting before we started the recording, I think my greatest strength has been as a storyteller, right? I have written 28 books and just, all those years at Sports Illustrated, I help other people tell their stories. And so when thinking about this question earlier, the one story that really stood out to me was with Mike Krzyzewski, obviously Coach Duke, probably today's John Wooden, right? Who I think is the greatest coach of all time. And so, Coach K tells this really powerful story, and I was with him one day. He was sharing it with me about these moments, right? When you learn how to move next play, as he likes to say, how do you get to how you get past the moment when things have completely gone against you, and he talks about it was his third year at Duke. He'd been hired by an athletic director, Tom Butters, who had given a chance to become the head coach to this former assistant coach at Army, right? So here he was getting his opportunity as a head coach at Duke to lead. He'd been the head coach at Army for a little bit, but he was getting his chance to lead. And there were a lot of people that questioned whether he was the right man for the job, whether it was, he was ACC and was he ready for it? And 3 years in, they're in the ACC tournament, in the first round tournament. They draw Ralph Sampson and University of Virginia. And they don't get beat. They get beat by 50 or some crazy number. It's a ridiculous number. And the immediate thing to do in that moment is to kind of run off the court and just, this is the end of it. It's the last game of the year, right? You're not going to the NCAA tournament. You just lost in the conference tournament and you got beat by 50. And Mike Krzyzewski pulls his team together and he says, no. He goes out that night for dinner with some friends. He tells the story. He says, I went to dinner with friends at that place you go to dinner after you've been beaten by 50. Denny's. and they're sitting there at Denny's, and his buddy, hoists his water glass and says, here's to forgetting a night like tonight, right? And Mike Krzyzewski lifts his glass and said, no, that's the wrong toast. Here's to never forgetting a night like tonight, where it would have been the opportune moment to say, you're right, maybe I'm over my head, maybe all the critics are right, maybe. He goes, instead, what he wanted was to remember what it felt like to get beat by 50. And they, the next year, practice started, first day of practice. He's got all his guys in there, Jay Billis, all those guys that I know you know and have been close with. And first day of practice, before practice begins, he lights up the scoreboard, and it's got the final score of the last game they played together as a team, which was when they, UVA lost by 50. And he puts it up there on the board, and I ask him, why did you do that? He goes, because, those are the moments when you find out what people are made of, right? It is easy in that moment to say, maybe this just isn't right for me. Maybe this isn't, maybe this, maybe that. Or I will never let that happen again. That year, Duke won, I think it was 10 more games. They won the year before. 2 years later, they were in the Final Four. How do moments that most people use as opportunities to curl up on the couch, the truly great ones, the very best, say that is not just, I'm not going to let that moment define me. In fact, I will let that moment remind me what it's going to take to be exceptional, and I've got to give better.
That's a amazing story, and I've heard you share that in a different interview, and I think it's just really important because it talks about not only Coach K and not basketball, but life in general, and that's really the whole emphasis of our show is to motivate and inspire people to never give up. And it's easy when you're winning championships, and it's easy when things are going well, but that's not when character and greatness is defined. It's during those tough times and those challenging times and those obstacles. So I wanted to ask you, Dunn, if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are if they're not familiar with what you do today.
Sure, thank you. So yes, I'm a longtime journalist. Spent 35 years working with some of the best some of the greatest high performers and high performing teams in the world. Sitting down, interviewing, asking questions, learning about what it means to be exceptional, what it takes to be extraordinary. And 10 years ago, I'd spent 12 years as a associate editor, of Sports Illustrated, and which was just a glorified title for a senior writer, and gave me an opportunity to again just be in the presence of people and teams that were worthy of study. And 10 years ago, Sports Illustrated offered the opportunity for a number of us to take early retirement. I jumped on that bandwagon. I'd just become a dad for the first time, and I decided that I wanted to take off in the next chapter of life, which for me was writing one book a year. As I mentioned earlier, my 28th book comes out this fall, and then to do between 60 and 70 corporate speaking engagements a year, mostly around the habits of high performance or the habits of high performing teams.
Now, for our listeners, just wanted to reiterate that Don did say his 28th book, so that was not a typo or that was not an error on your device you're listening to this. Now, are you able to share what that 28th book is or not yet?
Sure. It's due in 15 days. So stopping now to do this interview is a good break, but yeah, I'll get right back to it. I'm finishing up the autobiography of Joe Namath.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so been working with Joe for the last year. What an extraordinary human, an unbelievable storyteller. He's so much fun to be around. And for all the folks I've worked with, I'm learning as much here as ever. It's awesome.
Broadway Joe.
Yes.
So the word success and greatness is things we often toss around on our show as we're looking to, again, inspire and motivate our listeners. I was curious, how do you personally define success, and what does success mean to you?
Well, I as you and I have discussed, I mean, one of those books was with John Wooden. Coach Wooden and I worked together for 12 years, and he served as my mentor. Every other month for 12 years, I flew to California for a day with John Wooden, and recorded 500 hours of conversation. Awesome. He shared and taught me so much. So it would be heretical for me to try in any way to better define success than John Wooden did, and it's the peace of mind that comes from knowing that you did your very best, and only you know, right? Did I give everything I had to that moment? And if you did, you were successful. If somewhere you held back, if some sense of doubt kept you from preparing well or doing, then you didn't give. You might have even been successful in the world's eyes, but you would know that you weren't. And I love John Wooden's definition.
That's a great definition. And my parents, in my high school yearbook, when parents could take out a page, that's the exact quote that was in the back of mine. So it means a lot to me. One of the things we ask every guest is if they had to define themselves in only one word, what would that be?
Storyteller. I think that's my gift. That's my I'm good at putting people in positions to learn from others through story. That's my gift.
Having read a ton of your books, I would say that is definitely true. So one of the things we often talk on every show is a famous quote, and I myself subscribe to your daily quote email, and I was curious, it might be a very tough question because, again, you're so involved with the writing world, but do you have a favorite quote?
I do, actually. Actually, so I'm going to give you one that's a life quote and one that's a writing quote, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
As a life quote, it's from John Wooden, right? Again, sorry, he's so impactful, so influential in my life that you'll hear his name over and over again. But his favorite quote became my favorite quote, which was "Make each day your masterpiece." It's just so simple, right? It sounds so simple. The truth is, it's the most complicated assignment you can be given. Make each day your masterpiece, because to make it your masterpiece, you have to prepare well. You have to give your best. Yeah, I mean, there's so many elements to what is required to make something a masterpiece. But if you make today a masterpiece, and then you go to tomorrow and you do the same thing tomorrow, you string a few of those together, you got a great week. But make each day your masterpiece. And I love that whole concept of putting everything in all the focus that I have on today. And then Ernest Hemingway had an amazing writer's quote that just is always, he said, "It's enough for you to do it once for a few men to remember you. But if you do it year after year, then many people remember you, and they tell it to their children, and their children and grandchildren remember. And if it concerns books and they can read them, and if it's good enough, it will last as long as there are human beings." So I love this. I love that idea that if I do it well, if I write well, at the end of the day, what I get to do lasts forever.
No, it's. I knew you being a quote guy, you definitely have one or two. So you definitely did not disappoint.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you very much for mentioning that. And one of the things that I'd love to make sure I say to all of those who are listening to this is that, yes, I'm a big believer in quotes. I find them inspirational, and I think it's important every day to find something that inspires you. And so I do share a quote with about 100,000 people every day. I'm glad to know you're one of them. Thank you. But if anybody on this that's listening here has any desire for that kind of daily moment of inspiration, I know somewhere at the end we'll share an address, but I'd love to be able to stay in touch and offer that kind of inspiration.
No, we definitely will. And again, I might be biased, but I would definitely recommend. And I actually subscribe to a couple daily quotes of the day, and I've printed a lot of the ones that come from your emails, and I've shared them. So I definitely appreciate that.
Thanks, buddy.
So here's an interesting question for you. If you could go back, and I know this is only a couple years when you were 20, but if you could give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Slow down. Slow down. I was in such a hurry for way too many years of my, and again, my guess is this is not uncommon. Most old people like me would offer some version of this, but I didn't take time to appreciate all that was happening around me and all those who were responsible for what was happening around me, because I was in such a hurry. And I probably treated a lot. I undoubtedly treated relationships poorly as a result. Selfishness is a byproduct of failure to slow down, and all of those things would be true of the 20-year-old me.
No, I think that's great advice, and I do agree with what you just said. Is selfishness is a byproduct, and relationships definitely take a side note to things when you speed up. So I appreciate that. Now I think I know the answer to this question, but if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to go with someone I have not had dinner with, because obviously I put a lot of people I've been lucky enough to have. I would have dinner with Mother Teresa, because I would love to understand how to be as selfless as she. I've read much. I'm fascinated by her lifestyle, or what she sacrificed, and I don't believe I possess what it takes to do a fraction of what she accomplished, and so, but she'd be right there at the top of my list.
I think that would be an amazing dinner, and I thought I would be second on your list. So am I behind Mother Teresa?
You're right there.
Awesome. So one of the things, Don, we talk about, and a lot of the speeches and speaking we do in training, is the word accountability. And I was curious what that word means to you.
Responsibility. Accountability is what are you willing to are you willing to take responsibility for what's happening? And to me, I think that's it's the greatest failing. It's the thing that keeps most people from greatness. I think it is the greatest inhibitor of true success of any of the qualities out there, because accountability, failure to take accountability, failure to own and be responsible to others and yourself, is the place where you absolutely keep yourself from your fullest potential. If you got someone to blame every time something goes wrong, if you look at a referee and it's his fault or her fault, or you complain about the way the meeting schedule lined up against you, and that's why you didn't get the deal you came for. If there's something that you know what, then you're never going to take accountability or become responsible for what it is that you bring to the table. And I think that's the greatest. It's the greatest inhibitor of greatness.
So one of the things we launched this month is our Pay It Forward movement and our Pay It Forward theme, and it's something that we're very passionate about, is paying it forward for someone else with zero expectations in return. So I wanted to get your take or your perspective on what paying it forward means to you.
Well, so John Wooden, one of John Wooden's favorite quotes was, "You cannot live a perfect day without doing something for someone who cannot repay you." And I learned that quote actually when Walter Payton shared it with me, because he talked about how reading that quote from John Wooden actually changed the way he conducted his life for the last 20 years of his life, last 20 years he lived. He made it a daily occurrence to give something to someone who couldn't repay him, whether that was, just randomly finding someone who was looking at him to go over and give a hug to, or someone who could give him nothing in return. Walter actually, he had this, and he and I wrote. I had the chance to write Walter Payton's book, living with him, for the last 10 weeks of his life, while he was losing his battle with cancer. And Walter, one of the stories he shared with me was that, that he. The 1985 Bears, right? They're just one of the greatest teams of all time. So much excitement, but they had talent everywhere. But they also had this young woman that was the front desk clerk at their training complex, and she was going through a really rough stretch in her life. And the reason Walter Payton knew about it was that every day on his way into work, he would stop and he would talk to her about her children, what was happening in her life, what was happening with her children. And so, I mean, what a great lesson that is. You're the best player on the best team on the planet, and you're stopping to ask the secretary every day how she's doing. We should all be that good. But Walter realized that this young woman was struggling, and part of her issue was that she was working late, and her kids were getting home from school. So on 5 different occasions during that Super Bowl year, Walter, practice ended at 2:00. Walter walked to the front desk after he changed clothes and tapped her on the shoulder, sent her home to spend the afternoon with her children, and Walter Payton sat down to answer phone calls at the Chicago Bears front desk. Which I love that story because I can only imagine what it'd be like to be calling into Chicago to the Bears office on that day and have, "Thank you for calling the Chicago Bears. This is Walter Payton. What more can I do for you?" Right? But Walter said he did that because he knew there was nothing she could give him back that would trump him giving her afternoons with her children, and that for him was the greatest gift he could give someone else. And so that's a pay it forward moment that I think is powerful.
That's an amazing story, and I have not read your Walter Payton book. It's definitely on my to-do list, but that's an incredible story, and it just talks about who he was as a person, and no disrespect towards him as a football player, because he will always be one of the greats, and depending upon who you talk to, if not one of the greatest. I think that story is just even more amazing than what he did on the field, because it's just something that is so selfless that he didn't have to do, and probably most people don't know that he did it.
Exactly, because he didn't do it for attention. He didn't do it for accolades. He did it because he knew that was the gift he could give her that she could never repay him for.
No, I love that, and that goes right hand in hand with our whole concept of with zero expectations in return. So before we wrap up, I want to just change lanes here for a minute into what we call our hot seat questions, and the only request we have is that you just answer whatever comes to mind first.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. All right. So
the seat's feeling hot right now.
All right, get ready. So if you could choose one last meal and you could have absolutely anything to eat, what would it be?
Popcorn.
All-time favorite sport?
College football.
Favorite team?
Ball State University Cardinals.
Favorite all-time movie? Is that where you went?
Probably haven't gotten that one again before.
That is the first time.
Good.
All-time favorite movie?
God, The Notebook.
Do you have an all-time favorite book?
No, because I read constantly, and I'm always my favorite book changes all the time. Sorry.
No, that's a good answer, and that's very true. I was just going to say you couldn't say one of yours, so I'm glad you said that. Favorite singer or band?
Sade.
And if you were in a foxhole and you could only choose one person to have your back, who would it be and why?
My wife, because she would kick your butt.
I will not fight you or your wife, so you both win. So before we let you go and before we move on to the last question, I wanted to ask, Don, if you had any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Well, I appreciate, Chris, the opportunity to get a chance to talk about this. Obviously, these are important subjects, and this is and I love the format. But I made the offer earlier. I'd love to be able to stay in touch with any. DonYaeger.com is the name of the website. It's DonYaeger.com. If there's the ability to sign up for quotes there, obviously I write a blog. I write a piece every week for Forbes, Forbes.com. I continue to stay actively engaged, like you and others, trying to find leadership lessons in everything I get a chance to touch. And so, if people are fans of what you do, I'd love them to learn a little bit more about what I do, because I think there's a great symbiotic relationship.
No, there definitely is, and I would definitely recommend that our listeners check out not only your books if they have not done that yet, but also, again, DonYaeger.com, and that's where they can go to find your free email subscription to that, as well as a lot of other information about you as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it, and I look forward to hopefully talking with you soon.
Good. Count on it.
Thank you for listening to episode number 129. Don Yaeger is quite an interesting individual. From the initial story he shared about Coach K, up until the incredible story he shared with us about Walter Payton, Don has been fortunate to spend some quality time with some of the most successful athletes of all time. However, the best part is that Don has taken those stories, those struggles, as well as those successes, and he shared them with others, so we can all learn and improve. When I asked about his definition of success, he shared John Wooden's quote, which I absolutely love. Success is the peace of mind knowing that you did your best. Definitely one of, if not, the best definitions of success. When we were discussing quotes, Don referenced the importance of finding something every single day that inspires you. When I asked Don about accountability, his definition was something that we have not heard before, but it was very well said. He said that when it comes to accountability, he thinks of responsibility, and then he shared how he believes responsibility is the thing that keeps most people away from their greatness. Don shared another John Wooden quote when he spoke about what paying it forward really means to him. He quoted, "You can't live a perfect day without doing something for someone else that can't repay you." In closing, and as we are continuing with our Pay It Forward theme, I would like to pose a couple of questions for you. When was the last time that you did something for someone else knowing that they could never repay you? When is the last time you did something for someone else without telling a single person? I challenge each of our listeners to make a difference today. Don't stress about it or overthink. Just take action. It's not about the size of the gesture, the cost, or the complexity. Instead, focus on what it does for someone else and how it makes them feel. Put out good karma, do good for others, and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.